Hello, welcome back. In this lesson we're going to be learning how to make our first solos using these scales. Now so far you've learnt 3 patterns. In the coming lessons we'll complete learning all the patterns along the neck. But now let's get ready to learn how to do some soloing. I'd now like to demonstrate for you what it sounds like when you solo with these scale patterns. Now the chords I was soloing over were A minor 7th, barred here like that, and D7, barred here like this at the 5th fret. Now essentially, although a lot of these ideas were covered in the pentatonic section, I'll go over them again. A chord is made up of specific notes in the scale. Now if you have an A minor chord, that means the chord is made up of the notes A, which is the first note of the scale, C, which is the third, and E, which is the 5th note of the scale. And a chord by definition is anything that's more than one note played at the same time. So here we have an A minor chord, and it's an A minor 7th because the 7th note, this is the 7th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7th note in the scale is contained within the chord. And our other chord we're soloing over is D7, again barred at the 5th fret, and D7 will have the 1st, 3rd and 5th and 7th note from the D scale. Here's our D scale, and we have the 1st, which is a D, we have our 3rd note in that scale, which is an F sharp, and our 7th, which is a C. So we have a D, an F sharp, or we have a 5th as well. Sorry, our 1, 3, and 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a D, an F sharp, an A, and a C, or our D7 chord. Now, if you notice, the pattern we've selected, which we've learned from pattern 1, the root note is on A here. There's our scale pattern for pattern 1, and contained within that pattern is our A minor scale that we're using to solo with over these 2 chords. Now, once again, here's our pattern 1, which we're defining as an A minor scale. Although the pattern starts on a G, the scale begins on A with the middle finger, and it's made up of 7 distinct tones: A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and then our 8th tone is like our first, our A. I'm going to introduce to you chord notes and passing notes. A chord note is any note in the scale that is contained, that is, it's the 1, 3, 5, or the 7 of the chord that you're jamming with or playing along with. So if A minor is being played, and I hit this note here, the A, it will make sense that that note will ring with it. Now in a minute I'm going to demonstrate it, but before I do that, I want to point out that when it goes to D7, some of the notes will be different because the chord is different. But essentially there are 2 types of note. There are chord notes, which are the same notes in the scale and the chord, and there are notes called passing notes, which are notes that are in the scale but aren't made up of the chord itself. And the easiest way to understand that is just simply to listen to them. So I'm going to play some backing music, A minor and D7, and I'll demonstrate just using A and G. here, I'm playing an A. Now you can hear it rings and blends very well with both those chords. That's because A is a note in the A minor chord, and it's also contained in the D chord. Here's another A on the 4th string. You can hear it sounds fine. Now if I go back to G, it can only last for so long before it wants to resolve onto a chord note. This is a passing note, so G would be a passing note, and A would be a chord note. Let's listen down here. A, chord note, G, passing note. So essentially, when you want to make up a musical phrase, you try and round your notes off to the nearest chord note. That makes your phrase, your musical phrase or sentence, make musical sense. So if you go, those notes that I played in that 3-note pattern on that first string round off nicely to the nearest chord note. If I do something similar and leave it there on a passing note, the phrase itself seems like it's unresolved. It's okay to play a passing note, but usually you want to round your musical phrase or sentence onto a chord note. So what I'm going to show you now is on the first string you have 3 notes, A, B, and C. And on the adjacent string, that is on the 2nd string on the 8th fret, we have a G. Now, it just so happens with these 2 chords, which are on track 1 of the CD, that is A minor and D7, your chord notes are A and C, and your passing notes will be B, and if you incorporate the note on the adjacent string, the G, that will be a passing note too. So ideally, although you can play those notes, they're not suitable notes to round your phrases off on. Now, what is a musical phrase? Well, basically, when you're soloing, there are roughly 2 types of phrases. There are what I call melodic phrases, which are very simple, and there are dynamic phrases, which are usually fast and complex. Something like that. They create energy, but they're not particularly melodic. Think of it this way. A melodic phrase is something that someone could hear and almost sing the tune to it or put lyrics to it, whereas a dynamic phrase is explosive and creates a lot of energy and excitement in your soloing. Now, for now, we're dealing strictly with melodic phrases. Now, a melodic phrase is essentially made up of a pattern of so many notes, usually a short pattern of notes, like 3 notes or 4 or 5 notes, and you have a start note. In this case, we'll pick this note. And you have the filler notes in between, in the middle of the phrase, which we'll define as, say, B and C, or G, either of those we can use. And any melodic phrase would have a start note and a rounding off to the nearest chord note. I could also start really anywhere on these notes. I could start on the B, which is a passing note, that doesn't matter, and end on this chord note here. Essentially, what you have to do is feel the underlying rhythm of the music that you're jamming along to. And in order to do this, you can use what I call pedaling on one note. If you can feel what the rhythm is and play along just using one note, this is termed pedaling, it can often set you up with the type of rhythmic phrases that you need to use when you're incorporating the other notes in the pattern. In other words, if the music's playing and I start pedaling like this, and that gives me a good timing, then I can go off and incorporate those other notes. Now, don't be afraid when you're jamming along to double up some of the notes too. And do not be too concerned whether you know which note is a chord note and which note is a passing note. It actually becomes apparent when you do finally stop and round the phrase off. If you stop on a passing note, it'll feel a little incomplete, and you're going to want to make that quick edit and land on a chord note. Now, I'm going to play now with track 1 and show you how to do this, just using the first and second string here. So that's quite a nice melodic phrase. If I couldn't play at all, you could just do this. You could start off with one note and start pedaling. This is pedaling. Here we go. Now that sets me up with a nice rhythm. And I can use that rhythm to begin incorporating the other notes. So I start pedaling. When I'm happy with the rhythm, I'll throw in the other notes. Now what I'd like you to do is try playing along like this, but maybe start on different notes, like start on, say, the 8th fret of the first string, start pedaling, and try making up some phrases and see how it works. Good luck.